Purpose, does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Madam Speaker, I am sitting on the floor of the House of Representatives where members of Congress get sworn in, and I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his inquiry.
Madam Speaker, under the rules of the House and the United States Constitution, can a committee of the House be presided over by someone who is not a member of the House of Representatives and who is not a member of that committee?
No, only sworn members may serve on standing committees.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 26, I send to the desk as the designee of the Majority Leader a resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Point of order is reserved.
I
Clerk
believe
will
under
report.
House Resolution 27, whereas Representative-elect Sessions and Representative-elect Fitzpatrick were not administered the oath of office pursuant to the third clause of Article 6 of the Constitution until after the completion of legislative business on January 6, 2011, and whereas the votes cast by Representative-elect Sessions and Representative-elect Fitzpatrick on roll calls 3 through 8 therefore were nullities, now therefore be it resolved that 1. The votes recorded for Representative-elect Sessions and Representative-elect Fitzpatrick on roll calls 3 through 8 be deleted, and the vote totals for each of those roll calls be adjusted accordingly, both in the Journal and in the Congressional Record. 2. The election of Representative-elect Sessions to a standing committee and his participation in its proceedings be ratified. 3. The measures delivered to the Speaker for referral by Representative-elect Sessions be considered as introduced and retain the numbers assigned. 4. Any submissions to the Congressional Record by Representative-elect Sessions or Representative-elect Fitzpatrick be considered as valid. 5. Any co-sponsor list naming Representative-elect Sessions or Representative-elect Fitzpatrick be considered as valid. And 6. Any non-voting participation by Representative-elect Sessions or Representative-elect Fitzpatrick in proceedings on the floor be ratified.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I rise for a point of order.
Gentleman will state his point of order.
Madam Speaker, I make a point.
The House is not in order. The House will be in order.
Madam Speaker, I make a point of order that the consideration of this resolution is in violation of the House rules that we just passed, in which a new section was created to Rule 21 that required at least 3 days' notice to consider legislation, that it be posted on the Internet and we have a chance to review it. It is particularly important in this case since we're dealing with a constitutional issue, one that is without precedent, and I insist on the point of order.
The chair must observe that the rule cited applies to bills and joint resolutions.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
And pursuant to the rule, all points of order are waived.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state.
Am I to understand that under the rules that were just passed, they're already being exempting this resolution, which is of a question of the interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, that it's already being waived, that that new rule requiring 3 days is already being waived?
The rule that the gentleman cites only applies to bills and joint resolutions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 26, the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Weiner, each will control 2 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I am going to be House is not in order, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman's correct. The House is not in order. The House will be in order. House is needs to be in order. Members and staff will take their conversations from the floor. The gentleman
Madam
from
Speaker,
California.
I'm going to be the only speaker on our side, so I will reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York.
I thank you. I thought that the chairman was going to say that he was going to be brief. Well, you had no choice with this rule. It's a pretty short one. And I just want to say in the brief 2 minutes that we have here that this is a pretty important issue that we're faced with. And I should say just at the outset that I have the greatest respect for my friend Mr. Sessions. I consider him to be a friend, and I hope to get to know Mr. Fitzpatrick as well and to call him a friend as well. But what we're dealing with today is perhaps the most basic test that we have of whether we're going to take legislation seriously. To the great credit of the maker of this resolution, which we just got, it stipulates right in the first couple of sections we violated the Constitution on our very first day. The constitutional requirement for oath was violated, and I give you great credit for recognizing that in the resolution. Now, you do say that it created nullities, which is frankly a way of saying we operated outside this document on the same day we were reading it. When Mr. Sessions and Mr. Fitzpatrick stood up in front of a television set and held their right hand up, not unlike about 2,000 of my constituents, I suspect, they were violating a very important part of these proceedings. And yet we have a grand total of 2 minutes on each side, Mr. Dreyer and to my colleagues, in which to debate how to fix that infirmity. Mr. Sessions presided over the Rules Committee during a large portion in which he was not even a duly sworn member of the United States Congress. Yet we're doing nothing to go back and see was that participation influenced proceedings at all. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote against this resolution, not because Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Sessions are not members of Congress. They clearly are, and I congratulate them. But because for the first time in American history, the first time in the history of this body, we are going to pass a fix of a constitutional infirmity with, wait for it, 4 minutes of debate when we didn't have the bill until just now. And I strongly urge my colleagues to think about the precedent this sets. And I ask you now, I ask the consent of the chairman for an additional just 1 minute so we can have an understanding here.
I have no authority to do that. This is under the rule that...
No, if the gentleman will yield...
I don't have the authority to do that. We're living under this rule.
No, the gentleman may yield to unanimous consent request.
The House will be in order.
Only you, Mr. Dreyer, have the ability to accede to a unanimous consent request.
Does the gentleman from California yield for that?
I have my time, and I will be utilizing that, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from New York's time has expired. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the fact that my friend from New York has stated his respect for Mr. Sessions and Mr. Fitzpatrick. These two individuals were in this Capitol. They were in this Capitol when they took the oath of office. They didn't happen to be in this exact room. Under the standard of collegiality in Jefferson's manual, it is indicated that they have to be within the proximity of the Speaker. Madam Speaker, any member who does not vote in favor of this resolution is allowing the problem to persist. This resolution rectifies the problem which we all realize has happened, and I believe that we have a responsibility to this institution, we have a responsibility to the Constitution, we have a responsibility to the American people, and this resolution rectifies a problem that has existed. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired.
Parliamentary inquiry, Madam Speaker.
The House will be in order.
Parliamentary inquiry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, under the rules of the House, are the members of Congress who are not duly sworn entitled to be paid for the days of service in which they were here and were not sworn in?
The gentleman has not stated a proper parliamentary inquiry. Pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 26, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid
I'm
upon
going to
the
ask for a
table.
recorded vote,
The
Madam
gentleman
Speaker.
from New York.
Ask for a recorded vote, Madam
A
Speaker.
recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Well, before they finish their first week, the 112th, the U.S. House has to resolve a sticky issue of a couple of members who were not in the House chamber in the swearing-in on Wednesday. Pete Sessions and Mike Fitzpatrick, new representative from Pennsylvania, both in the U.S. Capitol. You heard David Dreyer, the Rules Committee chair. This is sort of a spin-off to the health care debate because Pete Sessions did preside over the Rules Committee at times yesterday. And Pete Sessions, or I should say David Dreyer, according to the Hill, seemed to imply that this resolution, which you're seeing a vote on now, would vitiate, would get rid of any of the votes and any of the votes that either Representative Sessions or Fitzpatrick took on the House floor on Wednesday and Thursday, possibly actions that Representative Sessions took before the committee, the Rules Committee, yesterday. It's a 15-minute vote. Now, David Dreyer said the two were in the U.S. Capitol yesterday. There is a report today that says that there was a fundraiser going on for Mike Fitzpatrick. This is the Sunlight Foundation reporting that two House Republican members, those two missed their swearing in to attend a fundraiser for Mike Fitzpatrick in the Capitol Visitor Center. The Sunlight writes that a spokesman for Fitzpatrick told the Huffington Post's Ryan Grimm that the event was not a fundraiser and that anyone could attend, but the invitation says that the invitation is to Mike's swearing-in celebration and ask for at least $30 per person. So this is the vote here to resolve the situation constitutionally in terms of the belated swearing-in for both Pete Sessions and Mike Fitzpatrick. 15-minute vote on the House floor. But the debate ahead has been guaranteed because the rule for the health care repeal bill has been passed by the U.S. House just a short time ago. That rule will allow for 7 hours of general debate. That'll happen next week, next Wednesday, and of course we'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN. Yesterday, though, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, after his Democratic caucus meeting, came out and talked about the future fate of health care repeal in the U.S. Senate. He spoke to reporters just off the Senate floor.
Happy New Year, everybody. I personally am just sobering up for mine, so I'm in pretty good shape here. The lame duck showed that we could work together, reject extremism, and really accomplish a lot for the American people. But I do get concerned when I hear my Republican colleagues say they want to focus on running up the deficit while taking things away from the middle class. And that's really been proven that that's what they want to do the last few days for sure. But let's take health care, for example. This morning, CBO came out with their score that the Republicans doing what they are talking about doing would increase the debt by $230 billion and in the second 10 years by well over $1 trillion. In addition to running up the deficit, the Republicans plan, just as it relates to health care, and I'm only going to mention a few of things, would take away free preventive care, the wellness program for seniors, would take away the 50% reduction in health care costs for seniors to continue filling the donut hole. It would take away the tax cuts for businesses that have health insurance for their employees. And it would give insurance companies the right to refuse coverage for those people who have pre-existing disabilities. Some have said over there that they have to take a whack at Social Security, that they certainly believe that our Wall Street reform bill was wrong. They sided then with Wall Street. They're obviously doing it again. But Republicans aren't stopping there. They're even threatening to shut down government, to have the United States of America default on its bills. You can imagine as well as I can the economic crisis that this would cause. And not only what it would do internationally, but what it would do at home. No more Social Security checks. The troops wouldn't get their checks. Veterans wouldn't get their checks. Border Security, FBI, all of it. We're focused as Democrats on creating jobs by investing in education so our kids can compete in this new international economy that we have, and we want to move off oil, which is now approaching $100 a barrel. And we need to give the middle-class Americans the tools they need to get ahead, not take benefits away from them, opportunities away from them. Okay, first question of the year. Yeah.
Are you saying that you don't want to...
Say that again?
Well, Mr. Boehner said that he wants spending cuts as a condition of advancing the debt limit. Are you rejecting that idea, or are you willing to entertain some in order to get it through the Senate, for example?
The pay-go system that we had in effect was ours. We believe that spending has to be cut. We believe that if you're going to have new programs, you have to pay for them, either by cutting spending or increasing revenue. But the one thing I would agree with the new speaker, and this is his quote, we're going to have to deal with it as adults, talking about the debt limit. Whether we like it or not, the federal government has obligations, and we have obligations on our part. That's a direct quote from Boehner.
Mr. Cantor said earlier this week that he thought one area that the parties could work together would be tax reform. Do you agree, and do you foresee a serious stab at major tax reform?
Yes, I do believe that the country is ripe for tax reform. Chairman Baucus has this as one of his first priorities, and he's going to hold hearings on that starting very, very soon. So in answer to your question, yes, 100 times. Our tax system is broken and needs to be fixed. I'm tired of the left. Let's go to the right here.
Representative Steve King has suggested that every appropriations bill the House passes should include language specifically prohibiting the funding of the health care law. If the House does that and sends those bills to the Senate defunding any funds for the implementation of the health care law, would you be willing to shut down the government to save the health care law?
The Republicans have to understand that the health care bill is not going to be repealed. News commentators, not editorial writers, not pundits, but people who report the news recognize it's not going to be repealed. I've mentioned just a few of the things that we have going now with the new health care bill. It's really good for the American people. To show how misguided the new House Republicans are, for a long, long time, anything that was done that had any money connected with it had to have a CBO score. They rejected that. They said, no longer are we going to be bound by that, they, the Republicans. That's why these numbers we got from CBO, repealing health care, it's not going to save money, it's going to create huge amounts of money. So are we saying the health care bill is perfect? Of course not. That's why the 1099 we've worked on a bipartisan basis to fix some of those things. We're willing to work in any way that's constructive in nature to improve the health care delivery system for our country. But repealing health care, they should get a new lease on life and talk about something else.
Senator Reid, there's been a lot of talk about state and city governments having fiscal troubles, and some experts are even talking about a crisis in municipal bonds and a possible congressional bailout. What is the mood here in Congress for a possible congressional bailout, and would you be willing to support one if it came to that?
Well, I don't think we have to worry about that right now. We just passed a law a matter of weeks ago that gives state and local governments significant relief. That's what the compromise is about. Remember, there was extension of the tax cuts. In exchange for that, we have a lot of programs that do many, many things to help local government and state governments, people who are down and out, including the unemployment compensation. So I think it's a little early to start talking about bailouts now.
Senator Reid, how likely is it at this point, do you think, change the rules that filibusters can make it harder for people to filibuster Congress?
We just had a very, very good caucus. It's very clear that Democrats want to change the rules. They believe, as I believe, the rules have been abused, as I said in my opening statement yesterday. And we're going to work toward that. We hope that the Republicans see the light of day and are willing to work with us. If not, we'll have to do something on our own.
You think you have the support to do that with the
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into specifics, but we have lots and lots of support to change the rules.
Senator, will you talk about the jobs bill you intend to introduce after the recess,
Yeah,
whether or not it will contain deficit reduction measures?
Yeah, we're not ready yet to talk about the different jobs, things that we're going to do. As I indicated in my statement here, we really are fixated on doing something to help the beleaguered economy. I'm terribly disappointed in what was done today in the House or late last night to violate really a public trust, a trust fund, the Highway Trust Fund. They have said the firewall is down. Those monies that when you go buy some gasoline at the pump, part of what you pay goes to a trust fund. The trust fund is to go to highways, bridges, roads. It also goes to mass transit. They've said, oh no, we're not going to do that. We're going to use that for other purposes. As a result of that, the Chamber of Commerce, the labor organizations said, what's wrong with that? Are they out of their mind? We have stocks of construction companies as a result of that headed down today. This is irresponsible to violate a law that created a trust fund for the American people to say we're just going to ignore that. It's the same as ignoring CBO scores.
If the House passes a repeal of the health care reform bill, will you commit to bring it to the floor in the Senate?
No.
So how are you going to, you said you wanted to...
Senator Harry Reid from yesterday and comments to reporters. The Senate is in recess until January the 25th when they will take up consideration further debate on their changes to the filibuster rule. Here on the House floor, they are wrapping up legislative action for the week after passing the rule that will allow them to debate the proposed repeal of the health care law. That rule allowing 7 hours of general debate, which will happen next Wednesday. We'll have that live here on C-SPAN, of course. Here, that the House is finishing up a bill, vote on a bill that resolves the issues of Representative Pete Sessions and Mike Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, both of whom were not properly sworn in when the 112th came in on Wednesday. And this is likely to be the last vote of the day, last recorded vote of the day, and last one of the week as well. We mentioned the Senate out until January the 25th, but live now on C-SPAN 2, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, who's been before the Senate Budget Committee for the last 2 hours or so. That continues. Some of the news out of that is that the chairman, according to the Associated Press, sketched a more optimistic outlook for the economy, but he said a $600 billion bond buying program is needed because it will take up to 5 more years to bring unemployment back to healthy levels. You may have heard the news today. The unemployment rate fell to 9.4%. It's the lowest since May of 2009, as employers in the month of December added 103,000 jobs.
On this vote, the yeas are 257 and the nays are 159, 3 voting present. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The chair lays before the House the following communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, under Clause 2G of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, I herewith designate Robert Reeves, Deputy Clerk, to sign any and all papers and do all other acts for me under the name of the Clerk of the House, which they will be authorized to do by virtue of this designation, except such as provided by statute in case of my temporary absence or disability. This designation shall remain in effect for the 112th Congress or until modified by me. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas, Clerk of the House.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring of the Majority Leader the schedule for the coming week.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield to the Majority Leader and congratulate him on his election as Majority Leader of his party. He and I have had the opportunity to work together over the recent years, and it's been a positive relationship, and I look forward to continuing that positive relationship, albeit in my diminished status. And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman's correct. The House is not in order. The House will be in order. Members, please take their seats. Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Maryland for those kind remarks. I want to also reiterate my pleasure being able to develop a positive relationship, working relationship with him. Understanding full well there will be disagreements, but there is probably a lot more that we can agree on, and look forward to exploring those avenues.
Madam Speaker, the House continues to be out of order, and I can't hear clearly the gentleman.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members and staff will take their conversations off the floor. Members will take their seats. The House will come to order. Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and so I appreciate the gentleman's remark. I want to congratulate him on his election to a position of Democratic whip, and look forward to working in this relationship. And I know that these roles have been reversed now in these colloquies, so I look forward to that as well. Madam Speaker, on Monday, the House is not in session. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. On Thursday and Friday, the House will not be in session to accommodate the Republican retreat. On Tuesday, we will consider at least one bill under suspension of the rules, which will be announced later today. We will also begin consideration of H.R. 2, the Repealing the Job-Killing Health Care Law Act. I expect the House to complete debate on H.R. 2 Wednesday afternoon. Also on Wednesday, Madam Speaker, the House will consider H.Res. 9, instructing certain committees to report legislation replacing the job-killing health care law. And, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
I thank the gentleman for outlining the schedule. There was an interesting article in the Washington Post today about your job-killing comments always being attached to the health care bill. There are obviously some of us who know full well that was not a part of the title, as I'm sure the gentleman would admit, and that, in fact, it does not do that at all. In fact, we think it creates jobs. But in any event, I thank the gentleman for announcing the schedule. I want to say we're disappointed, however, as he was when he was in my position, that we don't have a committee process for this very important piece of legislation.
I think it's important from your perspective, and it's important from our perspective, although we may have different perspectives on whether it should pass or fail. But it is an important piece of legislation. There was no committee process and no hearings, no opportunity for the public to be heard on the bill, no opportunity for the members to testify with respect to that bill. No witnesses were heard. And furthermore, under the rule, of course, we have been given no opportunity to amend. The gentleman, when he was in my position, would repeatedly indicate how disappointed he was that there were no amendments allowed on certain bills, and I want to reiterate that concern. And given the lack of the amendments, I want to clarify what he believes will be the finishing of votes on Wednesday. I understand debate will begin on Tuesday. Is that
right?
We will conclude on Wednesday. What time?
I'd ask, Madam Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman
I yield to my friend.
I'd ask the gentleman to repeat the question.
What time do you expect to conclude business on Wednesday?
On Wednesday. Right. I would say to the gentleman, Madam Speaker, that it is our intention to conclude by 7 p.m. on Wednesday.
I thank the gentleman for that response. In light of the fact that you have made, your side has made a pledge to allow ample time for members to read and consider it, and notwithstanding that, they've already not pursued that as vigorously as I think you would have hoped, and perhaps we would have hoped as well in the 112th Congress. I was wondering if the gentleman can enlighten us on what he expects to consider the rest of January after next week, so that members might have opportunities to anticipate issues that you're going to be bringing forward.
I thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker. And as to the inquiry about openness and the ability for members to have time to read the bills, as well as for the public to realize its right to know, we on our side believe in making sure there is that adequate time, and we posted on Monday legislation coming to the floor for this week and next. So I would say to the gentleman from Maryland, Madam Speaker, that it is our intention to continue to uphold our commitment to the 3-day rule, to allow for the public's right to know as well as members themselves to understand what it is we're voting for. As to the gentleman's comments regarding the up or down vote on Obamacare repeal, if the gentleman has looked at the postings online, he'll know that the repeal resolution is a page and a half. This is a repeal of a bill that was the subject of significant legislative time and other over the course of the last 2 years. It is clear that the public has litigated and, in essence, has decided its position on that bill given the results of November's election. And it comes down to whether you're for Obamacare or you're against it. And that's what the vote is. Again, a page and a half is what the bill is. So we have committed to continuing in the vein of an open process when it comes to trying to get it right as far as replacing the health care status quo. And we have committed, and the Speaker is committed, to making sure that our committees will go through regular order. Members of the minority and majority will have ample time to engage and participate in the discussions around what type of health care Americans deserve and what type of health care they want, which is how we will proceed when it comes to the so-called replacement resolution and its implementation. I'd also point out to the gentleman from Maryland that the Rules Committee has accepted the amendment proposed by the gentleman from Utah as far as a suggestion that he had as, regarding the SGR formula and the reimbursements for physicians under the Medicare program. Again, we are trying to work in a fashion that is open, that is as inclusive as we can. As the Speaker said in his remarks, the Speaker says we had, and was correct when he said we had no open rules under the last Congress. We intend for that not to be the case here. And I know that the gentleman joins me in the desire for us to be able to work together, and we believe that that will provide the best way forward for that. As to the gentleman's question about the remainder of January, Madam Speaker, we intend to focus on the theme of this Congress, which is cut and grow. We're going to be talking about ways to cut spending. We are going to live up to our commitment to bring a spending cut bill to the floor each and every week, Madam Speaker. We also intend to focus on what it is that is impeding job growth in the economy, and we'll be asking our committees to begin focusing on regulations that are being promulgated and pursued throughout the administration and its agencies that are precluding job growth. It is our hope, though, Madam Speaker, that these committees, our committees, will be fully organized by the end of the month so we can begin a process of regular order. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. Obviously, the health care bill that he and his party seek to repeal had probably more consideration, more open debate, more transparency, more amendments, more hearings than almost any bill that I have considered as a member of this Congress over the last 3 decades. Full and open consideration. Amendments offered from both sides in committee on a very ample basis. But I am glad to hear that you agree that there had been ample debate time for that. There has not been any debate time in committees or amendments on the repeal of that law. I certainly am hopeful that the gentleman does not mean to say that if the majority party concludes that the American public have already decided an issue, that there won't be, therefore, that will be the exception to the rule that you have put forth in terms of full and ample notice, debate, amendment process, and transparency. I would certainly hope that that would not be the case. I don't expect it will be the case, and I hope it won't be. Let me say, in addition, that I am very pleased that the majority party allowed in order the amendment by Mr. Matheson. As you know, we tried to have a permanent fix to the reimbursement of doctors who took Medicare patients. Unfortunately, the minority party in the Senate, which had the opportunity to do that, precluded us from accomplishing that objective. So I'm pleased that that needs to be done. We need to have a stable funding expectation by doctors when they provide services to Medicare patients, to seniors, as we want them to do, and we want them to continue to do. So I'm pleased that you allowed that amendment, and I would hope that members on your side would be supporting that amendment, as we will on this side. Let me ask you now, Mr. Majority Leader, I'm very concerned. I expressed this on the floor. Your rules, in my view, provide for some $5 trillion to be incurred in additional deficits. They allow that because you have exempted almost all of the possible reductions in revenues, tax cuts, reductions in revenues, notwithstanding no reduction in spending. Well, if you reduce revenues and you don't reduce spending commensurately, inevitably you will create large deficits, which inevitably will be paid by future generations. That's been the experience that again, I've had when we had significant tax cuts in the 80s and in the last decade, the decade of 2000, 2001, 2003, where we've created very large deficits. My presumption is that you will be finding commensurate reductions in spending to your tax cuts that you want to continue. If you don't do that, deficits will inevitably follow. The majority party has not done that in years past. Is it your expectation that that will occur in the future? But the question I want to ask you as well is that you have provided in your rules essentially ignoring CBO scores. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which services, has issued a preliminary score for the Republican Patients' Bill of Rights. They believe it will increase the deficit by $230 billion in the first 10 years by repeal and $1.2 trillion in the second 10 years. My question is, having deemed in the rule today a provision allowing the chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Ryan, to ignore the CBO score, will the majority continue to ignore CBO scores on legislation for the rest of Congress, or will we be fiscally responsible, in my view, and adhere to the advice and counsel we received from CBO? And I yield to my friend.
I thank the Democratic whip, and Madam Speaker, I would respond to his first question by saying that Washington doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. And we believe that it is better to allow folks to keep more of their hard-earned money so that we can see a return to growth in our economy, and that we are dedicated to making sure we deal with the spending problem here in Washington. As I said before to the gentleman, we are intending and will bring to the floor each and every week a bill that cuts spending. We are very focused, as you know, in bringing spending down to 08 levels to make sure that we are abiding by our commitment to live according to the same rules that everyone else does. While businesses and families are living within their means, tightening their belts, there's no reason in the world why Washington can as well, and I'm sure the gentleman agrees with me on that. As for the issues surrounding the CBO, the issue that we have in the dispute we have is not with the Congressional Budget Office. CBO scores what's put in front of them. And the reality is the Obamacare bill, Madam Speaker, relied on smoke and mirrors and budgetary shell games in order to present the picture that it presents or alleges to represent. And, Madam Speaker, there's nothing that has changed about the flawed assumptions underlying the old score of the Obamacare bill, only the dates have changed. This is the same gimmicks producing more false deficit reduction and, in fact, real spending increases. In fact, as the gentleman knows, Madam Speaker, the Medicare's chief actuary says that the Obamacare bill represents a maze of mandates, tax hikes, and subsidies that will push costs up. The bottom line, Madam Speaker, is we need to stop arguing about inside baseball budget gimmicks. There's no question that a new open-ended entitlement program will grow unsustainably fast, will drive costs up, and could potentially bankrupt this federal government as well as our states. So with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I want to say to my friend, the continuing rhetoric is, well, Washington doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. Americans in every family that I know understand that their revenues directly impact on their spending and vice versa. And if they don't, they have a real problem. If they don't have enough revenue to meet their expenditures, they've got a problem. And if their spending exceeds their revenue, they have a problem. I tell my friend, I understand what you're saying, and I've heard this rhetoric all of my career here in the Congress. And I tell my friend that when President Reagan was president, we never overrode a presidential veto of an appropriation bill because it spent too much. If he vetoed it, spent too much, never had a veto overridden. Nevertheless, we incurred an additional $1.5 trillion in deficits. Under President Bush, George H.W. Bush, we didn't override any veto of his, and we incurred an additional $1 trillion. That was $2.5 trillion plus. Under the Clinton administration, of course, an economic program, as you and I both know, that your party universally opposed, we had a surplus. The only president in your lifetime, and I think in mine, which is substantially longer, that's had 4 years of surplus. Now, I know you say the response that Mr. Dreyer gave to me is that, well, yes, we took over the Congress in '95. That's correct. And, of course, not only did you take over the Congress in '95, but in 2000 you took over the presidency as well and controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency. And during that period of time, we didn't pass any appropriation bills on our side. You were in full charge during the Bush administration first 6 years, and $3.5 trillion of deficit spending was incurred, making a total of over $5 trillion of deficit spending during the time that your party took the position that we didn't have a revenue problem, we had a spending problem. Well, it ended up being a $5 trillion deficit problem, adding to the deficit for our children and for my grandchildren and for my great-granddaughter. And I'm concerned about that. And that is why I'm so concerned about statutory pay-go and sticking with CBO scores and accommodating our spending and revenue. They are both related, obviously, and to ignore that eliminating revenue without eliminating spending doesn't cause deficits, I think is to ignore reality. And so I would hope my friend would talk to Mr. Ryan at the Budget Committee and bring us legislation which would, in fact, do what you and I want to do. That is, eliminate the deficit. If we got two messages during this past election, in my view, it was A, focus on creating jobs. We got to get to work. Americans are hurting. We had some good job numbers this month. We've created over 1.3 million jobs this past year, as opposed to losing almost 4 million jobs in the last year of the Bush administration. That's progress. But as I've said so often, it's not success. Success will be when every American who wants a job, willing to work, can find a job that can support him or her and their families. But we need to not pretend that revenues and spending are not inextricably related, and that if we give up revenues before we do the difficult thing, the tough thing, the adult thing, as Mr. Boehner said, and cut the spending, then cut the revenues. If Americans are buying it, then we ought to be paying for it and not passing along the bill to our grandchildren. And I would hope the gentleman would pursue that. If the gentleman wants to respond to that, I'll say something about health care briefly.
Madam Speaker, the gentleman and I have gone through these discussions for the last 2 years, and when we get into discussing the past, I normally posit a quote from Winston Churchill when he said, "If we open a quarrel between the past and the present, we shall find we have lost the future." And what my response is, Madam Speaker, we're looking to see that we do take the tough steps and cut spending. So I'm hopeful, with all the renewed enthusiasm that all of us have gained after the election towards fiscal sanity, that the gentleman and his caucus can join us and vote with us in terms of the spending cuts that we'll be bringing to the floor every week. The gentleman speaks about revenues, and absolutely, as an ongoing concern, this government has to be concerned with that. But we, first and foremost, must understand, and I think both of us realize, Madam Speaker, that in order to have revenues, we've got to have a growing economy. And so there is a balance, and that is where perhaps our two visions diverge. But it is my hope that we can work together by putting priorities in place, cutting spending, growing the economy. And that's the formula by which we will be operating, and I'm hopeful we can operate on those formula and that formula together. Now, yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's comment, and simply in closing, Madam Speaker, let me say this. I hope we can cooperate. But we do have a divergence, as my friend pointed out, and that's, of course, the nature of what the House of Representatives does, debates different points of view. Frankly, my experience, as I've said, is that when we diverged in a point of view in 1993, when my Republican friends took the position that accommodating revenues to spending would, in fact, from their perspective, be a job killer. They talk a lot about job killing legislation. They all voted against that legislation in 1993. And, in fact, some of my colleagues on my side of the aisle lost their election because of voting for that piece of legislation. In fact, however, it helped create the most robust economy anybody in this chamber has experienced in their lifetime. It created over 22 million jobs, as opposed to losing 8 million jobs in the last administration under President Bush, so that there was a substantial difference which you can see, touch, and feel, and read about, and know about. So I tell my friend, yes, there's a difference of opinion, but there's no difference of opinion on what happened. And when Winston Churchill, who you quoted before, and of whom I'm a great fan, one of the things that Winston Churchill was most known for was trying to remind his British friends, don't forget what dictators and despots do. Remember, and I make no aspersions, I want to make that clear, I'm simply saying he believed strongly in learning from the past and not continuing to make mistakes and not continue to do what failed in years before. So I agree with the gentleman. Looking at the past is for instruction on how to make the future better and to create those jobs that both he and I want to create and that America certainly is looking for us to create. And I thank the gentleman for this colloquy, and Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back the balance of his time.
Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns to meet at noon on Tuesday next for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Jones of North Carolina for today and Mr. Smith of Nebraska for today.
Without objection, those requests are granted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
You want that?
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today for the free trade agreement with Colombia. Colombia is America's fourth largest trading partner in Latin America, and the U.S. Department of Commerce estimates that 9,000 American companies trade with Colombia, most of which are small businesses and many of which operate in my district in South Florida. While 90% of Colombian goods enter the U.S. duty-free, American companies still pay tariffs for U.S. goods to enter Colombia. The Colombia Free Trade Agreement would eliminate obstacles and immediately boost U.S. exports to Colombia. By passing a free trade agreement with Colombia, U.S. GDP would increase by roughly $2.5 billion and exports by over $1 billion, creating thousands of jobs in the United States. The Colombia Free Trade Agreement is also a positive foreign policy gesture to one of our most reliable allies in the region and the oldest continuously functioning democracy in all of South America. Madam Speaker, it's time to stand with one of our best allies in Latin America and create thousands of jobs here at home with passage of a Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas rise?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering whether many people understand what we did today. Frankly, we gave permission for more Americans to die from lack of good health care. In fact, as I presented my amendments to the Rules Committee last evening, I was reminded, if you will, of those who really suffer because of lack of access to good health care. And I offered an amendment to ensure that H.R. 2 to repeal this good health care bill would not eliminate what we call community health clinics and deny rural and urban areas of good doctors and nurses who treat the children and seniors. And then I asked that we protect middle class and not have the insurance rates go up. And finally, to make sure that we don't have the Medicaid and Medicare fraud and abuse, and to protect those who need Medicaid, as my state of Texas is going to eliminate it. And so people will die as we proceed in this untimely and ludicrous process. But I'm glad that Pastor D.Z. Cofield in my district will ascend to the presidency of the NAACP in our local community. I believe with all of these good-thinking people, we'll be able to rise up and save the lives and oppose any repeal of this good, affordable care bill. I yield back.
Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for 1 minute? If not, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that today, following legislative business and any special orders entered into heretofore, the following members may be permitted to address the House for 5 minutes, to revise and extend their remarks and include therein extraneous material. Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon for 5 minutes, Mr. McDermott of Washington for 5 minutes, Mr. Al Green of Texas for 5 minutes, Ms. Woolsey of Ohio for 5 minutes, Ms. Capter of Ohio for 5 minutes, Mr. DeFazio of Oregon for 5 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that today, following legislative business and any special orders heretofore entered into, the following members may be permitted to address this House, revise and extend their remarks, and include therein extraneous material. Mr. Franks for today, Mr. Pence for today, Mr. Bartlett for January 11th and January the 12th, and Dr. Paul for January the 11th and January the 12th.
Action so ordered. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, and under previous order of the House, the following members are recognized for 5 minutes each. Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.